I'm creating a new Next.js 14 app, and I'm going to show you how to incorporate Prisma into the app. Prisma is a way to access your database using JavaScript. It makes interacting with your database so much easier, especially in Next.js. Your first step, if you haven't already, is to create your next app. I'm going to use TypeScript in this app. I always like to say ESLint no because there's so many annoying error messages that go along with ESLint. Now that you're in your app, one of your first steps is to make sure you have a .env file. I always like first thing to go to the get ignore file and make sure .env is part of the file. It does not look like it's part of it, so I'm going to add it here just so my .env file does not get saved. You'll want to create something called database URL, something like that. And this is where you're going to put your database string. If you're using something like Heroku or something like that, you'll want to go to wherever your settings are. In Heroku, if you go to settings, after adding, I just added a Heroku $5 Postgres database. You can go to settings and you'll want to click reveal config vars, and there will be a string there that you can copy and paste. To keep mine secret, I'll keep it secret, keep it safe, and not show it to you. But once you get that, you'll want to just paste that there in your database URL. If you go to the Prisma documentation, there's two ways you can set up Prisma. The quick start guide will start you from scratch, from the very beginning of creating a project with TypeScript, installation, things like that. We already did all that. We just created a project. So we can click one of these two links right here, and I'll put these links in the description below, but I'm going to say start with Prisma ORM from scratch. You'll notice here this line, if you want to use Prisma ORM with your own Postgres or something like that, use one of these links. Something I forgot to mention is that Prisma does, I think, have their own database, so you could use the Prisma database if you wanted to. I went ahead and used Heroku. I'm going to click start with Prisma ORM from scratch. So before these instructions will work, it says you need to have Node.js installed, Postgres SQL data server running. We have both of those. For this next part, Next.js already installs TypeScript for you if you say yes to the TypeScript instructions while you're following the terminal instructions when you create your app. So all you actually need from this is to npm install Prisma and make sure to say -- save dev at the end of the command. You can go ahead and run that in your terminal. Now, whenever you want to run something related to Prisma, you can say npx Prisma at the beginning. We'll go ahead and say npx Prisma init. Once you run that, it will create this Prisma file right here. And inside of it, there will be a schema.prisma file. You'll notice within this file, there's already something that says env database URL. This automatically gets that database URL that you just created in your .env file. You'll notice in the database URL, it has the word Postgres at the beginning. And so Prisma just automatically knew that this was a Postgres provider. And you can also leave this as it is, the provider Prisma client JS. You'll notice in the terminal itself, it tells you the next steps. It tells you to set the database URL in your .env file, which we already did. It says to make sure the provider matches whatever provider you're using. So I'm using Postgres. If you're using something else like MySQL, you'll want to make sure whatever kind of database you're using, you'll want to put that here in the provider part. And these next instructions should follow the instructions here when you say connect your database. Your next step is you want to make sure you connect your database. And if you're not sure how database strings work, you can look at these instructions here. It shows you how to put your username, your password, and all the other information you would need for a database string, which Heroku already does that for you. And this is actually an example of what a Heroku database string would look like. If you already have data in your database, you can say Prisma DB pool. What that will do is in your schema.prisma file, it will pull down your database schema. It will look like this, something like this. For each table in your database, it will create what's called a modal in your schema.prisma file, and it'll put the name of that modal here. And then these are the different columns within your database. And so if you already have a database with tables, it will just automatically pull all of that data down into your schema.prisma file. I'll put a link to this modals documentation in the description below. This goes in depth into how modals work. Some things to just notice is whatever you name the modal is what the name of the table is going to be in your database. Whatever you put on the left side here is going to be the name of the column. The second part here is going to be the name of the data type. So if this is an integer, you would put int. If it's a string, you would put string. If it's a Boolean, you would put Boolean. If it's a date, you'll want to say date time. For things like IDs, they have things like auto increment. This basically starts you at 0, and then the next one will be 1, then 2, then 3, and so forth. If you want to have a relationship between tables, the way that works is you could see here with author, it's connected to user. The way you would do that is you'll notice in user, it says posts, and the value for it, it says post and then array. So in this example, they're saying they want to connect a post table that's supposed to be full of arrays. Whenever you get post with matching user IDs, put that in an array whenever you get this user. And then you'll see down here in the post model how that works. The post has its own schema, and then the way to have a relationship with the user modal is at some point in your schema here, you want to give it a name. For example, for user, you could call it author if you want to name it that. And then you would say user as the value, as the data type. And that lets you know you're wanting to connect to this modal user. You want to have a relationship to the user. And then over here, this is where you can put kind of functions, different functions. You'll notice the date time has a now function you can use. Well, whenever you want to create a relationship between tables, you would just say relationship, and then it already knows it's going to have a relationship with the user, but it just needs to know how. How is that relationship going to work? And in the fields, you want to put an array with the thing that you want to have a relationship with. And in this, put the name of what you want to call that relationship in the post modal. So for example, down here, you notice there's something called author ID with an int as the data type. So what you're saying is I want this author ID within this post modal to be equal to the user dot ID. And that's what the references part of this is. In references, you're saying I want to connect to the ID of this particular user. And so it goes up here to get this user's ID, and then it saves it to this field, to author ID. It saves it to the author ID. And that should be enough to kind of get you started in understanding how all this works. So for me, since I'm starting from scratch, I don't need to say Prisma DB pool. I'm going to copy this as an example. I'll go ahead and put this in my schema.prisma file. And I want it to actually look highlighted like this. So I'm going to go to the extension store. I'm going to look up Prisma. And this is the one you'll want to download. It just says Prisma. It'll add the highlights and formatting and auto completion for you. So I'm going to install that. And now if you go here, you'll notice it gives the error messaging. It highlights everything. So you'll definitely want this Prisma extension. And I'll change all this later, but just to give an example, I'm just going to say user with an ID, an email, and a name. One of the functions you can say unique. That means there cannot be another user with the same email. And again, auto increment just starts from 0 and goes up. I want mine to be a bit more secure for this example. Instead of using auto increment, there's a function called UUID. It's already built into it, or you can use CUID. It creates a universally unique ID. And so I'll replace this with the universally unique ID. And to use that, you'll notice if I highlight over this, it gives you the error. You cannot use UUID with an int type. Again, all of this is why you really want this Prisma extension here. It'll tell you all this. And so I'm going to switch this to a string, and that should fix that. The error goes away. All right. And now that I have my modal set up the way I want, you can just say, you'll notice down here, it says run Prisma generate. Before you run Prisma, you just always want to say npx. So say npx prisma generate. Whatever you do here will generate whatever you put in your schema.prisma file. So if you ever make any changes to any of your tables, any of your modals, it will make the changes to the database. Luckily, Prisma is pretty good with their error messaging and confirmation in their terminal. If you're about to make a change that could delete all the data in your database, it will ask you, are you sure you want to do this? It will delete all of the data in your database if you make this change. It'll ask you before you do that. If you don't want to break something, so say for example, I wanted to add like an age. Well, if I said this was int with nothing, if that's all I said, if there were any other users in the database already, when I make this change, it would delete all the users just to be able to make this change. The way to fix that is you'll want to say question mark for sure if it's not required. And the major thing to know is if you already have a database, just add something called a default value. If you add a default value to a new column that you add to a modal, as long as it has a default value attached to it, it will not delete all your data. So you can add to your columns as long as you add a default value, and then it will just make the change to your database without deleting anything. So that's just something to remember. I'm going to go ahead and take this out for now, and I'll just say npx prisma generate. All right, and now you're ready to interact with the database. You'll notice it went ahead and installed something called Prisma client into your project. If you go to your package.json file, it should be there, and there it is. And it shows you how to use Prisma in the terminal itself. And this is all you have to do. Just say import Prisma client from the Prisma client. I'm going to go to the home page, for example, and just import it right there. The next step is I like to say const db. That helps. That's short for database rather than Prisma. And you can say equals new Prisma client. And from now on, you can interact directly with your database in any server-side component in Next.js. So for example, if I wanted to say all users, you can now say all users equals await. And to do that, you'll want to switch this to an async function. Await, and then you just say db to directly connect to the database. You would say dot whatever table you want to use. So for me, I'm wanting to connect to the user modal, and then I'll say find. And then if you're using TypeScript and click dot after that, it'll show you all these different functions that are available with Prisma to interact with your database. And that's kind of the easiest way to learn how all this works. You can just play around from here. So for example, if you want to know the count, there's a count function, and it'll explain over here what it all does. You can create new rows in your database. You can create many new rows. You can delete rows. You can delete many. What I'm going to say is find many because I want to find all the users. And then I'll just trigger the function, and then that will automatically get all the users in my database. And you'll notice I didn't put user like this. I lowercased it. That's because to interact with your database, it'll just automatically lowercase your modal names. So if you were to connect directly to your database, for example, instead of the table name having uppercase user, it would be lowercase user. The rest of the values can still be camel cased. So for example, if I said user age, you could still then connect to it by that. And I'll just go ahead and add this in. And I'll show you what I was talking about. It might not give the error because I don't have any data in just yet. But now that I added that in, I'm going to say npx prisma generate to add this to my table. And it went ahead and added that to the table for me. And so now I can look up things based on that. And I'll show you how to do that. So say instead of finding everything, I wanted to find something based on something, like for example, where age is equal to 10. Well, you would put an object inside of the function, and there's something called where. And the thing to know is you put an object first, and then within that, you would put a key with value object for all the commands after that. And then I can say user age, and you'll notice it's pretty cool if I just start typing because this is TypeScript. Prisma already keeps track of all of that. So user age automatically pops up as an example, as a value I could use. So I could say user age and say I want the user age equal to 10. Then it will only get all the users where the user age is equal to 10. It has something called an order by command too. You can say you want to order by, put an object here. You could say whatever. I'll say user age again. And for the value, you would put a string for ascending or descending. I'll say ascending. And to find the rest of the functions, you can just Google Prisma functions. And then you could go to the modals documentation. And I'll put this in the description below. But you look for the modals in Prisma client. It tells you all the different functions and how they all work. So for example, if you did click on the find many, it tells you all the various functions you can use. You'll be using where a lot, order by a lot. If you only want to take a certain amount of results, you can use the take key and put the number. So for example, say I only wanted to get the first 10 results that appear. I could just say take 10 and say I want to skip, like you have a paging function. I'll say skip the first 10 results, skip to number 11. Another thing you'll probably use quite a bit is the select command. Basically, instead of getting everything within a modal, you can just get the things you want. So say I just want the email and user age, I could say select. And then in this value, I would say user age because I want the user age. And you need to say true and say I want the email. I would say true to that too. And then if I console log this, I should be able to see the values in the terminal below. Again, I don't currently have anything in the database, but let's see what it shows, if it shows any results. So I'll say npm run dev. I'll open this up. Okay, and this actually got an error. It's because I forgot to tell you to do one additional thing. What we just ran, npx prisma generate, this will allow you to interact with it locally, but that's for databases that are already pushed up to Postgres. So just because I made these changes here doesn't mean it's reached my Postgres database yet. To do that, you need to say npx prisma db push. This pushes any changes you made to your schema.prisma up to your database. Once you've done that, once all your changes are officially in the Postgres database, once you've said npx prisma db push, you'll want to run npx prisma generate again. And what this does is it makes all of these changes available to your client, your Prisma client. And so let's shut down our server and start it up again and see if it's fixed now. All right, and it actually worked. And you'll notice there in the console log, it's just an empty array. And say I wanted to change this to count, kind of works the same way. So it does the same query. And you'll notice there, all users, it says user age 0, email 0. That means the count is 0 for the two things I wanted to select. And if you ever want to create an object, you can use the create function. I'm going to shut this down because I don't want to create. Well, actually, I'll just go ahead and leave it live. I'll change this to, actually, I'll just create another one. I'll say const create user equals await. I'll create this user first, db.user, and I'll just say create, and I will actually shut this down so it doesn't create a ton of users first. And you'll see in the create function, you'll want to use something called data. And so I'll create, and within this, I'll say data. And this is where you can put in the values here. So the ID will automatically be created for you if you have a default and something like UUID. But for the email, I'll just add something. I'll say tj@tj.com, and then you'll want to give it a name. And if something to remember here is if you don't want something to be required, you should put a question mark at the end of the data type. But if there's no question mark, it is required. You have to put a value in or it won't work. And so I'll just go ahead and show an example of that. Well, actually, you'll notice here, there's going to be a TypeScript error until you do put everything that you're supposed to put. If you tried to run this, it wouldn't work. And so let's just see what happens if you tried to run it. You'll notice it didn't work because it said you also have to add in a user age because it says user age is required. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a user age, and you'll notice now it worked. The data is gone. And so this actually did did work, but I'm getting an error. I'll show you what I'm seeing. It's showing it's not working a second time because I use that same email, tj@tj.com. And you'll notice in my modal, it had a unique constraint. And so here it's giving me this error saying it's not working because of the unique constraint. There's already a value of tj@tj.com in the email field, so you can't do that. And so now that that worked properly, I'm going to delete this code. And now you'll notice it's not producing a value because I have this skip value here. So it's skipping the first 10 values, but there's only one value. So I'm going to remove that skip. And now you'll see it's returning a value. And currently it's just counting the value. If I wanted to switch back to find many, as you can see there, it returns an array with the value of that user in an object. And then you can interact with it from there. That is how you set up and use Prisma inside of Next.js. Before you leave, I wanted to let you know about nextchat.ai. Nextchat.ai is powered by ChatGPT, but it does not keep track of your conversations. I personally use this at work where I'm working with a lot of proprietary data. My clients wouldn't want me sharing that data with OpenAI. And so I use nextchat.ai. It's a way to guarantee that the data is safe. And it also has some cool features that are unique. You can save your conversations and you can search through your conversations. So it has a search feature. So if I worked with Postgres recently, I could search for anything related to Postgres. This was one of my conversations I had about Postgres. You can also save prompts. So for example, if I had a Next.js folder, that's another thing. You can create folders to save your conversations in and your prompts in. And within the prompts folder, if I had specific things to a project, say I have Next.js 13 API route handlers that I use a lot. And so I want anytime I create a new conversation, I could then just / go to the Next.js 13 prompt and go ahead and teach OpenAI, teach ChatGPT how this technology works, and then go ahead and start asking questions about it, and it'll start responding. Let us know what you think about Prisma in the comments below. I personally love it. It makes interacting with my database so easy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon if you'd like to see more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.